August 14th, 1940. The dim glow of shaded lamps flickered across the wooden huts of Bletchley Park, deep in the Buckinghamshire countryside. Rain lashed against the leaded windows, a relentless drumbeat that mirrored the pulse of the war machine grinding across the channel. Inside Hut 8, the air hung heavy with the scent of damp wool, cigarette smoke, and the faint metallic tang of overworked teleprinters. You could almost feel the chill seeping through the cracks, as if the English fog itself had invaded this secret nerve center of the Allied effort. Alan Turing hunched over his desk, his wire-rimmed glasses slipping down his nose as he scribbled furiously on a notepad. At 28, he was already a legend in these shadowed halls, a mathematician whose mind danced through logic like a ghost in the machine. His fingers, stained with ink and the residue of pencil erasers, paused only to light another cigarette from the stub of the last. Around him, the room buzzed with quiet urgency. Young women in cardigans and sensible skirts, wrens they called them, borrowed from the Navy, hauled baskets of perforated tape from the intercept stations. Each strip was a lifeline, punched with the cryptic dots and dashes captured from German radio transmissions. "Another batch from the U-boats," murmured Joan Clark, Turing's sharp-eyed colleague, as she slid a reel onto the bomb machine. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the exhaustion of nights blending into days. At 23, she'd traded the quiet life of a Cambridge scholar for this clandestine war, decoding the Nazis' Enigma cipher one rotor at a time. The bomb whirred to life beside her, its drums spinning like the chambers of a colossal lock, clicking and clacking as it tested permutations. The sound was hypnotic, a mechanical heartbeat echoing the Morse code that had arrived hours earlier, faint signals snatched from the ether by listening posts on the coast. Outside, the blackout was absolute. No lights pierced the velvet darkness, save for the occasional sweep of a warden's torch patrolling the perimeter. Bletchley Park, once a grand Victorian estate, now resembled a besieged fortress, barbed wire coiling around the manicured lawns, sentries in greatcoats stamping their feet against the mud. The war had come here not with bombs, but with whispers. Adolf Hitler's Kriegsmarine prowled the Atlantic, their wolf packs sinking Allied shipping at a terrifying rate. In the first 6 months of 1940 alone, U-boats had claimed over 1 million tons of cargo. Churchill had called it the Battle of the Atlantic, and it was bleeding Britain dry. Turing leaned back, rubbing his temples. His babies, as he affectionately called the bombs, were his invention, electromechanical beasts designed to mimic the Enigma's daily settings. But tonight, the machine ground stubbornly, its indicators flashing red more often than green. "It's the naval settings again," he said, his voice a soft Midlands drawl cutting through the hum. "They're layering in a fourth rotor. Goering's Luftwaffe might be predictable, but Dönitz's submarines, they're evolving." Across the room, a teleprinter chattered to life, spitting out a fresh intercept. Lieutenant Commander Alistair Denniston, the grizzled head of the Government Code and Cipher School, snatched the sheet. His face, etched with lines from too many sleepless nights, tightened as he scanned the German text. Still gibberish, of course, but the patterns hinted at convoy coordinates off the Irish coast. "If we don't crack this by dawn, convoy HX-72 is done for," he barked, his Scottish brogue sharpening the words. 14 merchantmen loaded with Canadian wheat and American steel. "The Prime Minister's breathing down my neck. Says we're the thin line between rations and ruin." The team sprang into action. Peter Hilton, a lanky Oxford mathematician barely out of his teens, fed the new tape into a duplicate bomb. His eyes, red-rimmed from poring over logbooks, darted to the wall clock, 11:47 p.m. The hut's single radiator rattled feebly, doing little to ward off the autumn chill that clawed at their bones. You could hear the wind howling through the oaks outside, carrying echoes of distant air raid sirens from London. But here, the real battle was silent, a war of wits against Wilhelm Canaris and his Abwehr spies. who guarded the Enigma keys like holy relics. Joan adjusted a dial, her fingers nimble despite the fatigue. "Try cribbing from the weather report again," she suggested. It was a trick they'd honed. German meteorologists sent daily forecasts in clear text, providing a crib to align the cipher. The Bombay accelerated, its relays snapping like distant gunfire. Suddenly a green light flared, the room held its breath. Turing bolted upright, crossing the floor in 3 strides. "Loop it back," he ordered. The machine obliged, churning through thousands of possibilities per minute. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then the teleprinter erupted in a frenzy of keys. Plain German text unspooled. Coordinates for a rendezvous point, 52 degrees north, 15 west. U-47, under the infamous Günther Prien, was poised to strike. Deniston's fist clenched the paper. "By God, we've got it." Relief washed over the hut like a wave, but it was fleeting. Turing was already sketching modifications for the next bomby prototype, a faster, fiercer version to counter the Germans' tricks. As the clock struck midnight, the rain eased to a drizzle. Joan lit a cigarette of her own, sharing it with Peter in the corner. "One surrender at a time," she whispered, watching the intercepts pile up. But they both knew the truth. Each crack in the Enigma was a chink in the Nazi armor, turning the crackle of radio static into the sweet sound of Allied survival. The night pressed on, the codebreakers delving deeper into the darkness, their minds the sharpest weapons in the arsenal. The convoy was rerouted just in time, slipping past the Wolfpack under Admiralty orders. But in Hut 8, the victory was bittersweet. Turing paced, muttering about probability matrices and Turing machines, ideas that would one day birth the computer age. Deniston clapped him on the shoulder. "Well done, old chap. But dawn brings another cipher." Outside, the first hints of grey light filtered through the blackout curtains. The war machine never slept, and neither did they. Yet in that fragile moment of triumph, as the bomb cooled and the tapes were archived in locked cabinets, you could sense the turning tide. Static, once meaningless noise was becoming strategy. Surrenders would follow, not from bombs or bullets, but from the quiet unraveling of secrets. Bletchley's Guardians of the Code pressed on, oblivious to the history they were forging, one midnight at a time, February 1941. The winter wind howled across the frozen fields surrounding Bletchley Park, whipping snowflakes like shrapnel against the hut's frost-rimed windows. Inside Hut 6, the air was thick with the acrid bite of solder and the oily hum of prototype circuits. You could taste the tension on your tongue, a metallic edge sharper than the blackout razors slicing the curtains. The clock on the wall ticked past 11:00 p.m., its hands a relentless reminder that the night was young, and the Enigma's shadows grew longer with every passing hour. Gordon Welchman, the hut's steely commander, paced the narrow aisle between desks cluttered with graph paper and half-assembled gadgets. At 37, his face bore the scars of command, deep furrows from decisions that saved ships or doomed them. He paused by the latest intercept station, where a young operator named Barbara Joseph hunched over a receiver, her headphones clamped tight, fingers flying across the Morse key to log the faint beeps filtering in from the coastal Y stations. "It's shark traffic again," she said, her voice muffled but urgent. Shark, that was the naval Enigma variant, a beast even more elusive than the Army's red or the Air Force's green. The Germans had upgraded it, adding complexity to thwart the bombs, and now U-boat packs were ravaging the outbound convoys from Halifax. Across the room, Max Newman, the Oxford professor turned code-crushing savant, tinkered with the Robinson machine, a hulking contraption of vacuum tubes and relays, Turing's brainchild evolving into something deadlier. His pipe clenched between his teeth, sent curls of tobacco smoke weaving through the lamplight, mingling with the steam from mugs of weak tea. "The cribs are holding, but the traffic's volume is exploding," he muttered, adjusting a dial that whined in protest. Newman was the quiet architect here, his mind a labyrinth of Boolean logic that turned chaos into clarity. Beside him, Tommy Flowers, the unassuming post office engineer with grease-stained sleeves, soldered a new panel. Flowers' eyes, sharp behind thick spectacles, flicked to the growing pile of perforated tapes. If we can automate the chaining, we'll cut the time in half. No more manual loops at midnight. The door creaked open, admitting a gust of icy air and Joan Clark, bundled in a woolen overcoat dusted with snow. She'd come from Hut 8, her cheeks flushed from the dash across the compound. In her arms, she carried a locked briefcase stamped with the Crown's insignia, fresh keys cribbed from a captured weather cipher. "Turing sends his regards," she said, shaking off the flakes. "He's buried in the three-wheel bombs, but this should sync with tonight's settings." At 24 now, Joan had blossomed into the Hut's linchpin, her intuition for patterns rivaling any man's. She unpacked the documents on Welchman's desk, the paper crackling like distant artillery. Welchman nodded, his breath visible in the chill. The Hut's heaters struggled against the cold, leaving everyone's fingers numb as they handled the tapes. Outside, the perimeter lights, dim blue slits for the guards, cast eerie shadows on the snow, where sentries patrolled with Sten guns at the ready. Bletchley was a fortress of secrets, but whispers of espionage haunted the nights. A recent defector from the Abwehr had hinted at German suspicions codenamed Cicero, sniffing too close to the park's trails. One wrong decrypt and the whole operation could unravel. "Run it," Welchman ordered. The team converged on the bomb, its brass rotors gleaming under the shaded bulbs. Peter Hilton, now a fixture with his lanky frame and quick wit, threaded the tape through the reader. The machine roared to life, drums whirring like a squadron of Spitfires, testing 17, and Jaru 0 possibilities a second. Clicks and snaps filled the air, punctuated by the occasional curse as a false positive lit the board red. You could feel the vibration through the floorboards, a pulse syncing with your own racing heart, as if the Hut itself were alive, straining against the cipher's chains. Hours blurred. By 1:0 a.m., the first breakthrough came. A partial decrypt spilling from the teleprinter, orders for U-99 to shadow convoy OB-288, position 48 north, 20 west. Welchman's eyes narrowed. "Dönitz is tightening the noose. That's 20 ships, mostly oilers from Aruba." He grabbed the phone, a secure line to the Admiralty in Whitehall, where admirals pored over charts by candlelight to evade the blitz. "Route them south, hard starboard. We've got the Wolfpack's fangs," but victory was a siren, luring them deeper. The next tape arrived at 2:30, snatched from a burst transmission off the Rockall bank. This one was thicker, layered with indicator tricks the Germans had introduced in January, reversed wheel orders, plugboard swaps that mocked the bombs. Joan leaned in, her breath fogging the machine's casing. "Look here, the repetition in the frame. It's a looped message, probably to a Milchku supply sub." Milchku, the milk cows, those massive Type 14th U-boats that refueled the packs at sea, extending their terror. Cracking this could starve the wolves. Newman barked adjustments, Flowers cursing as a tube flickered out. They swapped it mid-run. Hands steady, despite the fatigue gnawing at their edges. The Hut smelled of burnt wiring now, mixed with the sour tang of unwashed bodies pushing through the night. Outside, an owl hooted, a rare sound amid the war's din, while distant searchlights from a coastal battery probed the sky for Luftwaffe raiders. In London, bombs might fall, but here the explosions were internal, minds fracturing under the weight of what-ifs. What if they failed? Ration cards would multiply, factories idle, the island starve. At 3:45, the green lights cascaded. The teleprinter danced, unspooling German in crisp blocks. Rendezvous coordinates for U-552 and her sisters, fuel dumps exposed like veins. Welchman slammed his fist on the desk, not in anger, but exultation. Static to strategy. Reroute the hunter-killers, destroyers from Scapa Flow. Let the depth charges sing. The team exhaled, shoulders slumping as the bomb wound down, its heat a brief warmth in the cold. Joan scribbled notes for Turing, her pen scratching like nails on slate. Hilton brewed more tea, the kettle whistling defiance, but Welchman wasn't done. One more run before dawn. The traffic's peaking. Dönitz is betting on our blindness. They dove back in, the night stretching like taffy. By 5:00 a.m., another decrypt. A U-boat surrender signal, not literal, but tactical. Forces pulled back after a feint exposed their flanks. The Admiralty acted swiftly. HMS Wolverine pounced, her screws churning the Atlantic foam, torpedoes finding marks that echoed back as maydays. As grey light seeped under the curtains, the hut fell quiet save for the scratch of logs being filed. Newman puffed his pipe, staring at the tapes. Each crack widens the breach. Soon, the flood. Flowers nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. Joan glanced out the window where snow blanketed the wire, pristine and deceptive. The Codebreakers had turned midnight's void into dawn's advantage, static whispers yielding to the roar of survival. Yet the enigma evolved, a hydra regrowing heads. They rose, stiff and unyielding, ready for the next watch. The war's code was breaking, one frozen night at a time, forging surrenders from the silence. June 1942. The summer heat clung to the air inside the newly expanded Block F at Bletchley Park, turning the wooden walls into a stifling sauna despite the fans whirring overhead like exhausted propellers. You could feel the sweat trickling down your back, mixing with the pervasive odor of hot solder, stale coffee, and the faint ozone bite of overtaxed electronics. Midnight had come and gone an hour ago, but time meant nothing here. The clocks were props in a theatre where the real drama unfolded in streams of binary pulses and flickering valves. Outside, the Buckinghamshire night was alive with crickets, a deceptive peace shattered only by the occasional rumble of a truck delivering fresh intercepts from the Y stations dotting the coast. Tommy Flowers wiped his brow with a rag blackened by grease, his spectacles fogging as he peered into the guts of the Colossus prototype. At 38, the post office engineer had become the hut's unsung wizard, his hands calloused from nights like this, coaxing life from a machine that dwarfed even Turing's bombs. The Colossus wasn't for Enigma, not yet, but for the Lorenz cipher, the Germans' teleprinter code that armored high-level traffic from Berlin to the front lines. "She's temperamental tonight," Flowers muttered, his Cockney accent thick with frustration as he twisted a screwdriver into a recalcitrant chassis. The beast loomed before him, 5 tons of racks, 500 vacuum tubes glowing like fireflies in a jar, relays chattering in a symphony of clicks that mimicked the Morse they'd once decoded by hand. Beside him, Max Newman supervised with his usual professorial calm, puffing on a pipe that sent aromatic clouds curling toward the ceiling. Newman's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the read-in panel, where perforated tapes unspooled from a captured German Schlüsselgerät machine. The traffic's from OKW, Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. If we crack this, we see Hitler's orders before his generals do. At 55, Newman was the elder statesman, his mind a vault of theoretical brilliance that Flowers translated into hardware. The room buzzed with a dozen technicians, mostly women in khaki overalls, their hair pinned back under headscarves, fingers nimble as they loaded tape baskets weighing as much as a child. Across the block, in the adjacent analysis room, Gordon Welchman conferred with Joan Clark over a map pinned to the wall, its surface a chaotic web of pins marking U-boat sightings from the latest shark decrypts. The naval enigma had been their lifeline, but now the Germans were adapting again, new wheel orders, Steckerbrett permutations that slowed the bombs to a crawl. Joan's face, illuminated by a gooseneck lamp, showed lines of wear. At 26, she'd risen to section leader, her wedding ring hidden to preserve the miss that kept male egos intact. The wolf packs are shifting east toward the Gulf of Mexico, she said, tracing a route with her pencil. Dönitz is desperate after our spring successes. If Lorenz gives us the big picture, we can predict the next push. The door banged open, admitting a rush of warmer air, and I.J. Good, the slight statistician with a mop of dark hair and an intellect that pierced puzzles like a bayonet. Good clutched a sheaf of crib sheets, his voice urgent over the din. Fresh intercept from the Dover station, burst transmission at 23:45. It's fish traffic, no doubt. References to Unternehmen Cerberus, the Channel Dash. The room tensed. Everyone knew the stakes. Just weeks ago, the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau had slipped through the English Channel under heavy escort, a humiliation that had Churchill fuming. Cracking Lorenz could reveal the next feint, starving the Kriegsmarine of surprise. Welchman nodded sharply. Feed it in. Flowers. Synchronize the photoelectric cells. The team moved like a well-oiled engine. Tapes clattered through the sprockets, the Colossus awakening with a low growl as its valves heated up. You could hear the paper rustling, smell the sharp tang of ink from the logging printers, feel the floor vibrate underfoot as the machine began its assault. 17, 000 characters a second, Boolean operations slicing through the cipher's veil. In the corner, a Wren operator named Eleanor adjusted the amplifier, her hand steady despite the humidity frizzing her curls. Signal strength is marginal, she reported, static from the beam, probably jammed by their directionals. Hours ground on. By 2:00 a.m., the first partial output emerged, fragmented German. Orders for supply convoys to Norway, troop movements hinting at a Baltic build-up. Newman's pipe went out. He relit it absently, leaning over the console. There, the depth. It's Goering coordinating with radar. Luftwaffe cover for U-boat refits. Flowers cursed softly as a valve popped, sparks dancing like fireflies before he smothered it with a wet cloth. The hut's air grew thicker, the fans doing little against the heat pouring from the Colossus's innards. Outside, a fox yipped in the underbrush, oblivious to the shadows where guards with Tommy guns paced the wire, eyes scanning for any flicker of betrayal. Joan cross-referenced the decrypt with Admiralty charts, her pencil flying. This ties to Shark. U-515 is earmarked for the Caribbean run, if we reroute the escorts from Iceland. Her words trailed off as the machine hit a snag, its counters freezing on a wall of red lights. Good dove in, recalibrating the chai wheels with mathematical precision. Try the Delta variant, it's the plugboard shadow. The Colossus protested, then surged back, relays snapping like bones breaking. Sweat beaded on Welchman's forehead. He hadn't slept in 48 hours, surviving on black tea and adrenaline. The war had escalated. America's entry had flooded the Atlantic with targets, but also hunters. Bletchley's output now fed not just London, but Washington, where OSS analysts pored over sanitized ultra-intelligence. At 3:30, the breakthrough cascaded. The teleprinter erupted, sheets piling like fallen leaves. Full decrypt spilling directives for Operation Drumbeat's extension, U-boat wolfpacks vectored toward the U.S. East Coast. Coordinates for refueling rendezvous, 40 north, 50 west, Milchku subs exposed, their positions naked. Welchman snatched the top sheet, his voice a whip. Get this to Denniston, priority 1. The Yanks can lay ambushes from Norfolk. Relief rippled through the room, but it was edged with urgency. Good tallied the hits, 5 packs neutralized before they formed, convoys like SC-94 slipping through unscathed. Flowers stepped back, wiping his hands, the Colossus humming down to a purr. She's a monster, but she works. Newman clapped his shoulder, a rare smile cracking his reserve. Joan archived the logs, her movements precise, while Eleanor brewed tea from a dented urn, the steam a brief comfort. But the night wasn't over. A new tape arrived at 4:15. Abwehr traffic layered over Lorenz, spies in Lisbon feeding back on Allied shipping. They suspect something, Good warned, scanning the text. References to Bletchley, codename Ultraleaking. Welchman paced, the floorboards creaking under his boots. Double the watches. Flowers reinforce the counters. The team redoubled, the machine groaning back to life. Dawn crept in, painting the windows gold, but they pressed on, turning the night static into a cascade of revelations. Surrenders loomed, not just U-boats limping home, but strategies crumbling from within. In the humid heart of Bletchley, the Codebreakers forged ahead, their midnight labors etching the path to victory, one pulsing valve at a time. The Enigma's grip weakened, the tide inexorably turning. October 1943. The autumn fog rolled thick over Bletchley Park like a shroud, muffling the crunch of gravel under the wheels of a staff car pulling up to the expanded blocks. Inside the newly reinforced Hut 11A, the air was a stifling cocktail of heated valves, machine oil, and the faint, acrid whiff of burning insulation from relays pushed to their limits. You could hear the relentless patter of rain on the corrugated roof, syncing with the staccato rhythm of teleprinters, spitting out intercepts faster than ever before. Midnight had struck 2 hours past, but the blackout curtains sealed the world outside, trapping the team in a bubble of electric urgency where sleep was a distant memory. Tommy Flowers stood at the heart of it all, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, sweat carving rivulets down his face as he monitored the second Colossus, now a veteran beast, its two 400 tubes glowing with an infernal light that cast long shadows across the racks. At 41, Flowers had traded his post office tweeds for a worn lab coat, his hands scarred from countless tweaks to this electronic colossus that devoured Lorenz traffic like a ravenous wolf. "She's peaking at 5,000 characters a second now," he said, his voice gravelly over the hum, twisting a knob to balance the photo-electric tape reader. The machine's fans whirred like distant aircraft engines, pulling in cool air from vents jury-rigged to combat the tropical heat it generated, enough to power a small village. Max Newman hovered nearby, his pipe unlit for once, forgotten in the pocket of his tweed jacket as he scanned the output console. The professor's face, lined deeper by the relentless grind, reflected the green flicker of indicator panels. OKW to Rommel, it's the Italian front bleeding into this. If we peel back the layers, we see the whole retreat. At 58, Newman directed the tester team with a quiet authority, his Boolean insights now amplified by Flowers' hardware. Around them, a cadre of operators, wrens in crisp uniforms, their fingers calloused from handling miles of tape, fed the beast. One, a sharp-featured woman named Dillis, adjusted the sprockets, her eyes darting to the clock. 2:15 a.m. The hut's single bulb swayed slightly, stirred by the vibrations, illuminating stacks of crib sheets and logbooks piled like sandbags. Across the partitioned room, Gordon Welchman leaned over a secure teletype link to the Admiralty, his voice low and clipped as he relayed partial decrypts. The naval enigma, now dubbed Triton after the Germans' latest upgrades, had nearly slipped their grasp in May, but American bomb factories in Dayton had flooded Bletchley with machines, turning the tide. Joan's voice cut in from the map table, where she pinned fresh coordinates with trembling precision. U-262, reporting to BDU. They've lost contact with the Tunis convoy. Our hunter groups from Gibraltar are closing in. At 29, Clark had become indispensable, her mind a scalpel dissecting patterns that others missed, even as she juggled motherhood in secret, stealing hours from the night. The door hissed open on pneumatic hinges, new for security, and I, Jay Good, slipped in, rain dripping from his Macintosh, clutching a damp satchel of fresh bursts from the Scarfoot listening post. "Bagatelle traffic," he announced, shaking off the wet. "Lorenz overlays on Enigma, direct from Dönitz to the Milchkuh fleet. They're rerouting south after the Azores debacle." "Good," ever the prodigy at 33, had risen to deputy, his probabilistic models predicting cipher shifts before they hit. The team absorbed him seamlessly. Tapes clattered into the reader, the colossus awakening with a surge that made the floor thrum under your feet. You could taste the ozone in the air, sharp as a storm, feel the heat radiating from the racks like a forge. Welchman straightened, rubbing his stubbled jaw. Run the Chi and PC wheels parallel. Goods Delta crib from the last fish key. Thus the machine obliged, its counters whirring through permutations, relays clacking like machine gun fire in the confined space. Outside, the fog swallowed the guards' footfalls, their torches faint ghosts probing the perimeter wire, where rumors of German spies, perhaps Cicero's successors, kept nerves taut. Bletchley had grown into a sprawling complex, blocks linked by covered walkways. But isolation bred paranoia. Every shadow held the threat of Ultra's exposure. In Washington, the code was shared cautiously, feeding the U.S. Navy's codebreakers at OP-20G, but leaks could doom them all. By 3:00 a.m., the first cracks appeared. The teleprinter chattered erratically, then steadied. German text unspooling in blocks. Orders for U-340 to evade at 36 North, 10 West. Supply dumps in Spanish Morocco exposed. Flowers whooped softly, a rare crack in his engineer's reserve, as he noted the timings. 11 minutes flat, faster than last month's peak. Newman nodded, cross-checking against the Enigma output from Hut 8, where Turing's successors now wrestled with 4 rotor beasts using American-supplied Heath Robinsons. The integration was seamless. Lorenz gave the strategic spine, Enigma the tactical nerves. Jones' pencil raced across the chart, linking dots. Wolf packs fragmented, their refuels intercepted by RAF Sunderlands, dropping depth charges into the swells. But the night deepened its claws. A new tape arrived at 3:45, thicker, encrypted with a variant psi wheel that snarled the Colossus's logic. Dillis cursed under her breath. Reloading as sparks flew from an overtaxed valve. Good dove into the math, scribbling equations on a blackboard smeared with prior runs. It's the extended key stream. They're compensating for our cribs. The hut's air grew heavier, the rain intensifying to a roar that drowned the fans. Welchman paced, his boots echoing, while Joan brewed tea from a hissing kettle. The steam a fleeting balm against the chill seeping from the floor. Memories of lost convoys haunted them. HX 229 in March, 70 ships mauled. But now the scales tipped. American shipyards churned out hulls faster than U-boats could sink them, and Bletchley's whispers guided the escorts. At 4:30 the green cascade hit. The Colossus triumphed, outputs flooding the trays. Full decrypts of BDU directives, U-220, and her sisters vectored into ambushes off the Canaries. Coordinates for a Milchku rendezvous, U-488, laid bare, ripe for HMS Starling's task group. Welchman grabbed the phone, his brogue urgent. Admiralty, Priority Ultra, sink the milk cow at 28 North, 35 West. Wolfpack starve by Christmas. The team exhaled, shoulders unknotting as the machine cooled, its heat lingering like a spent fever. Good tallied the yield, 3 packs disrupted, convoys like ON 208 rerouted unscathed, their cargoes, tanks, fuel, men, bolstering the Italian campaign. Flowers wiped his hands on his rag, surveying his creation with paternal pride. From static to salvation, she's earning her keep. Newman relit his pipe, the tobacco's glow a small fire in the gloom. Joan archived the logs, her movements fluid despite the ache in her back, while Dillis and the Wrens cleared tapes for the dawn shift. But respite was illusion. A final intercept pinged at 5:15. Abwehr chatter hinting at Enigma key compromises. Göring's fury over lost Luftwaffe signals. They're closing the net, Good murmured, scanning the text. Welchman halted his pace. Then we widened the breach. Flowers prepped the third Colossus for parallel runs. As false dawn greyed the curtains, the hut pulsed with renewed purpose. Rain eased to mist, the fog lifting to reveal the park's silhouette. Towers and wires a testament to ingenuity. The Codebreakers had transmuted midnight's chaos into dawn's deliverance. U-boats signaling surrender frequencies, not in defeat, but in disarray. Forces scattered, Dönitz's strategy fraying. In the Atlantic's vastness, depth charges would bloom like flowers, hulls crumpling under Allied fire. Bletchley's silent warriors pressed deeper, their labours weaving the noose tighter, turning encrypted whispers into the inevitable fall of the Reich's veiled empire. The night yielded, but the war demanded more. One valve, one decrypt, one surrender at a time. May 1944. The spring drizzle painted the eaves of Bletchley Park's outer blocks in a relentless sheen, the air inside the humming expanse of Block G thick with the scent of warm bakelight, flickering neon from diagnostic panels, and the underlying mustiness of damp earth seeping up from the foundations. You could feel the subtle tremor in the floorboards, a vibration born from the synchronized roar of 10 Colossus machines, now dominating the space like a mechanical orchestra, their vacuum tubes pulsing with an otherworldly blue glow that chased shadows from the corners. Midnight had blurred into the small hours, the blackout shrouding the compound in ink-black silence, broken only by the muffled crunch of gravel under patrolling boots and the distant hoot of a nightjar in the hedgerows. Tommy Flowers moved between the racks like a conductor, his lab coat stained with oil spots, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of a grease-blackened hand as he fine-tuned the master control panel. At 43, the engineer had overseen the fleet's expansion, each Colossus a sibling to his original, now devouring Lorenz and Tunny traffic at blistering speeds, up to 25 Zauzeren characters per second, their photoelectric eyes scanning tapes with unerring precision. "Keep her steady on the PSI stream," he called to a cluster of technicians, his voice steady amid the whine of cooling fans that battled the heat rising like steam from a locomotive. The block's walls, reinforced with sandbag barriers against potential sabotage, echoed with the clatter of relays and the soft hiss of printers logging outputs that could reshape battlefields from Normandy to the Pacific. Max Newman stood at the oversight desk, his tweed suit rumpled from a day that had started at dawn, poring over a stack of cribbed keys with the intensity of a surgeon mid-operation. His pipe, clamped unlit between his teeth, bobbed as he murmured calculations to J. Good, who scribbled furiously on a notepad, his slim frame hunched under the weight of probabilistic forecasts. At 60, Newman directed the tester section with grandfatherly poise, but his eyes burned with the fire of imminent victory. The Germans' high command ciphers were fracturing under the assault, revealing the sinews of their crumbling empire. "This batch from Bow Manor, it's OKW to Kesselring in Italy. If we align the delta wheels, we expose the Anzio reinforcements." Good nodded, his dark hair dishevelled, fingers flying across a slide rule. At 35, he'd become the oracle of odds, predicting cipher breaks with eerie accuracy that saved lives across the channel. In the adjacent plotting room, separated by soundproof baffles, Gordon Welchman conferred with Joan Clark over a vast map table illuminated by shaded lamps, its surface a mosaic of coloured pins tracing U-boat shadows in the Atlantic and troop dispositions along the French coast. The air here carried the sharper tang of fresh ink and cigarette smoke, Joan's own habit picked up in the endless nights. At 31, she led the naval analysis with quiet command, her cardigan sleeves rolled up as she traced a route with a red pencil. Triton Keys are holding after the April change, but the Milchka traffic spiking, U-490 provisioning off the Azores. Cross-reference with Fish, and we've got Dönitz's last gasp. Welchman, his face gaunt from chain-smoking and command's toll, leaned in, his Scottish inflection clipped. Overlord's window is narrowing. Schaeff needs every edge. Eisenhower's counting on Ultra to blind the Luftwaffe spotters. The door swung open with a pneumatic sigh, admitting a gust of cool, rain-scented air and a Wren messenger clutching a sealed cylinder of fresh tape from the Chicksands intercept station. "Bagatelle Heimish overlay," she reported breathlessly, handing it off to Dillis, now a seasoned operator with calloused thumbs from years of sprocket work. The team absorbed the intrusion seamlessly. Tapes unspooled into the Colossus readers, the machines surging to life with a collective growl that vibrated through your chest. Boolean logic tearing at the Lorenz veil like wolves at a flank. You could hear the paper feed rasping, smell the faint char of overworked valves, feel the electric charge prickling the air as counters flipped through millions of permutations. Welchman glanced at the wall clock. 2:45 a.m., its hands a stark reminder that D-Day loomed mere weeks away, the invasion fleet massing in southern ports under a veil of deception that Bletchley wove thread by thread. Outside, the perimeter lights cast hazy beams through the mist, guards in oilskins sweeping for intruders amid whispers of Abwehr probes. A recent leak in Cairo had heightened the paranoia, codenamed Cloak and Dagger, but the park's defenses held ironclad. In Washington, the shared Ultra fed the U.S. Codebreakers at Arlington Hall, their bombs humming in tandem, but Bletchley remained the fulcrum. Its decrypts the hidden hand, guiding Montgomery's tanks and Bradley's infantry. By 3:30, the first yields emerged. Printers chattered in frenzy, unspooling German directives, orders for panzer reserves to the Pas-de-Calais lured by Fortitude's phantom army of inflatable tanks and radio feints. Newman's pipe finally ignited, the tobacco's glow mirroring the green lights cascading across the panels. There, the depth, its yodel coordinating with von Rundstedt. No reserves for Normandy, they're chasing ghosts. Flowers adjusted a feedback loop, his hands deft despite the fatigue etching lines around his eyes. Good tallied the hits, his voice rising with rare excitement. 90% clarity, Luftwaffe reconnaissance blinded, U-boat patrols rerouted into minefields off Brest. Joan pinned the revelations, her map blooming with safe corridors for the Armada. Convoys like TX-1 slipping undetected toward the beaches. But the cipher fought back. A stubborn variant snarled at 4 Zewolo, a peace-eye wheel extension mocking the cribs, halting 3 Colossi in a cascade of red indicators. Dillis reloaded under Flower's guidance, sparks flying as he bypassed a faulty tube with a jury-rigged wire. The block's heat intensified, fans laboring like bellows, the rain outside pounding harder as if echoing the strain. Welchman paced the aisle, boots thudding softly, while Joan cross-checked against Enigma outputs from the American Fed huts, where younger mathematicians wrestled 4-rotor beasts. Memories of Black May, when U-boats sank 50 ships in a month, faded against this tide. Now, the wolves starved, their packs decimated by hunter-killer groups, vectored by Ultra's whispers. At 4:45, the machines triumphed anew. Outputs flooded the trays. Full decrypts of BDU signals, U-549, and sisters exposed in the Bay of Biscay, ripe for swordfish strikes. Coordinates for a final Milchku convoy, U-170, laid bare, HMS Affleck's task force close in like a noose. Welchman seized the secure line to Whitehall, his words urgent. Priority Ultra, intercept at 47 North, 12 West, Overlord's flank secured. The team paused, breaths sinking in the humming aftermath, shoulders easing as the Colossi purred down. Good sketched projections, predicting a U-boat surrender wave by summer's end. Flowers stepped back, surveying his electronic legion with quiet satisfaction. From midnight murmurs to morning marches, she's rewriting the war. Joan archived the logs, her pencil steady. While Dillis and the Wrens cleared the decks for the next barrage, Newman relit his pipe, the smoke curling like victory banners. But the night clawed onward. A final tape arrived at 5:20, Goering's frantic orders to scramble fighters against phantom threats. "They're unraveling," Welchman murmured, eyes on the map where Normandy's shores beckoned. As pre-dawn light filtered through cracks in the blackout, the block thrummed with purpose. Static had surrendered to strategy. Invasions unopposed, wolves culled, the Reich's codes crumbling into irrelevance. Bletchley's midnight sentinels forged ahead, their decrypts the unseen artillery pounding the path to liberation, one pulsing revelation at a time. The tide surged, irreversible, toward the Reich's final unraveling. April 1945. The vernal warmth of a Buckinghamshire spring seeped through the cracks in Block G's walls at Bletchley Park, carrying the faint, earthy scent of blooming hawthorn and turned soil from the surrounding fields. Inside, the air hummed with a feverish intensity, thick with the metallic tang of overheated vacuum tubes and the sharp bite of ozone from relays firing in ceaseless volleys. You could feel the subtle quake in the reinforced concrete floor, a rhythmic throb from the 12 Colossus machines now arrayed like sentinels, their blue-glowing innards illuminating the vast space in an ethereal light that danced across sweat-slicked faces and scattered sheaves of decrypt paper. Midnight had dissolved into the witching hours, the blackout curtains drawn tight against a moonless sky where distant Allied bombers droned eastward, their contrails invisible harbingers of the Reich's death throes. Tommy Flowers navigated the narrow aisles between the towering racks, his lab coat hanging loose on his frame, sleeves pushed up to reveal forearms etched with fresh burns from hasty repairs. At 44, the engineer was a shadow of his earlier vigor, sustained by black coffee and the unyielding drive to keep his electronic progeny alive amid the deluge of final intercepts. He paused at the lead Colossus, twisting a calibration dial with oil-stained fingers as its fans labored like overtaxed lungs, expelling waves of heat that made the room feel like a pressure cooker. "Steady on the Mu-61 variant," he instructed a young technician, his Cockney rasp cutting through the mechanical symphony. The machine's photoelectric cells whirred, devouring tapes at 30. 0 characters per second. Boolean gates slicing through the remnants of Lorenz and the battered Enigma networks that clung to life in Berlin's bunkers. Max Newman leaned against the oversight console, his tweed jacket unbuttoned, pipe smouldering forgotten in an ashtray, as he scrutinized the cascading outputs with eyes hooded by exhaustion. At 61, the professor's once professorial poise had hardened into grim resolve. The war's end was palpable, yet the ciphers fought on, desperate gasps from a regime cornered on all fronts. "This is from Flensburg, Dönitz's last stand," he murmured to J. Good, who hovered nearby, his slide rule clicking like a Geiger counter amid the probabilistic storm. Good, now 36 and gaunt from relentless calculations, nodded sharply, his voice a taut wire. "The U-boat surrender orders are embedding in the fish traffic. If we peel the PSI layers, we confirm the fleet's collapse. No more wolf packs, just ghosts in the fjords." In the adjoining analysis chamber, partitioned by heavy baize drapes to muffle the din, Gordon Welchman pored over a sprawling map table under the harsh glare of angle-poised lamps, its surface a frenzy of colored overlays marking the Rhine's breach and the Elbe's crossings. The air here carried the drier scent of graphite and aged newsprint, mingled with the faint floral note of Jones' perfume, a rare luxury amid the grind. At 32, Clark directed the final ultra-syntheses with unflinching precision, her hair pinned back severely as she jabbed a pin into the Baltic coast. Type Shachibil electro-boats, U-2511 and her sisters, signaling compliance with Grand Admiral's directive. Cross this with the naval Enigma and we've got the surrender coordinates, Wilhelmshaven by week's end. Welchman, his face a map of hollow cheeks and shadowed eyes, exhaled smoke from a cigarette pinched between nicotine-yellowed fingers. Montgomery's boys are rolling up the Ruhr. Scheif wants absolute certainty. One false signal, and fanatics could scuttle the lot. The pneumatic door wheezed open, ushering in a draft laced with petrichor from an overnight shower, and a Wren courier, her uniform crisp despite the hour, deposited a bulky reel stamped with the Crown's seal. Burst from the Chicksands array, Thrasher key, direct from OKW remnants, she said, voice hushed as if in a cathedral. Dillis, elevated to shift supervisor with lines of command etched into her brow, took charge, her hands moving with the assurance of 5 years' toil as she threaded the tape into the reader. The colossi responded in unison, a chorus of growls and snaps that vibrated through your bones, counters racing through the cipher's dying convolutions. You could taste the tension on your tongue, bitter as quinine, hear the relays chattering like frantic Morse, smell the faint sizzle of a valve on the brink as Flowers lunged to stabilize it with a swift solder touch. Welchman glanced at the chronometer. 3:15 a.m., its sweep hand a metronome to the invasion's aftermath, where Patton's tanks had surged beyond the Siegfried line and Zhukov's hordes closed from the east. Outside, the compound stirred faintly. Guards in greatcoats traded shifts under sodium lamps, their Sten guns slung low, while lorries rumbled with supplies for the demobilizing code teams. Paranoia lingered, Abwehr holdouts whispered of vengeance, but Bletchley's veil held. Ultra secrets, shared now with the Soviets via cautious channels, ensured the Reich's capitulation unfolded without ambush. In Arlington Hall, American counterparts echoed the labors, their machines humming in solidarity. But this night belonged to the originators, the midnight architects scripting the finale. By 4:00, the yields broke free. Printers erupted in a torrent, sheets avalanching onto the floors. Plain text directives unspooling like confessions, Donitz ordering U-boat crews to surface, flags of truce at Kristiansand and Copenhagen, fuel depots abandoned in the face of RAF Lancasters. Newman's pipe clattered to the desk as he snatched a page, his voice cracking with uncharacteristic fervor. It's over. The Grand Admiral's broadcast embedded here. No more operations. Total cessation. Flowers eased back from the racks, a weary grin splitting his face as the machines idled, their heat a fading ember. Good tallied the cascade. 24 U-boats accounted for, surrender points mapped from the Skagerrak to the Gironde, their wolf fangs pulled in a chain reaction of decrypts that had starved the pack since Black May. Joan traced the final lines on the map, her pencil halting at Berlin's ruins. Static to submission, Hitler's orders bypassed, the chain of command severed. Welchman crushed his cigarette, seizing the secure scrambler to Whitehall. Admiralty, ultra-final, U-boat fleet yields, vector hunter killers for oversight, no escapes. The room sighed collectively, the air lightening as if a storm had passed, shoulders slumping in the hush following the mechanical roar. Dillis gathered the outputs, archiving them in fireproof vaults while the Wrens dimmed panels, their faces alight with the dawn of peace. Newman retrieved his pipe, the tobacco's rekindled glow a beacon. From cribs to capitulation, we've turned their whispers against them. But the vigil endured. A last tape filtered in at 4:45, fragmented Abwehr pleas for terms, Göring's Luftwaffe dissolving into desertions. Flowers prepped the Colossi for standby, his hands lingering on the controls like a father bidding farewell. Good projected the endgame, surrenders rippling across fronts, from the Oder to the Alps. As the first blush of sunrise pierced the curtains, painting the block in roseate hues, Welchman paused at the window, fog lifting to reveal the park's lawns greening under tentative light. The Codebreakers had alchemized endless midnights into this, encrypted defiance yielding to the white flags of defeat, U-boats bobbing crestfallen in neutral harbors, their captains stepping ashore under Allied eyes. Bletchley's silent forge had hammered the Reich's secrets into oblivion, the static of war silenced at last. In the quieting hum, victory whispered, not in thunder, but in the steady unraveling of chains, long forged in shadow. The night released its hold, the world remade, one final decrypt at a time.